Good morning again. I'm going to give you ample warning. Our verse for today was short. That is foreshadowing. Our message today will also be short. I'll be bluntly honest, that is because I want to give more time for the wonderful music that we have today. And if you want more, come join us next week where I'm going to be wrapping everything together in the next sermon next week. So you see what I'm doing there? Not only am I giving you more music, but then I'm also giving you a reason to come back again next week. So Paul finished his first missionary journey, and it was a great success. He went around, he's planting churches, he's spreading the word. Thousands of people are getting baptized, lives are being changed, structures are being threatened and toppled. And so Paul is doing what we would consider a great job. Okay? He even actually helped change the church's thoughts on Gentile believers, because we see in Acts chapter 15, there's this whole thing, and at one point the church is like, and I have all these strict rules and laws and regulations and trying to really control like who comes in, and Paul's like, this isn't good, guys, and lays out his reasoning, and then afterwards the church is like, you might be right. So Paul, by all accounts, is having great success. So I find it really fascinating that in Acts chapter 15, starting in verse 36, we actually see a problem. Like, despite all of the good, despite all the success, despite all the great things that are happening, we actually see a huge problem. So starting in verse 36, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Come, let us return and visit the brothers and sisters in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are doing." Barnabas wanted to take with them John called Mark, but Paul decided not to take with them one who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not accompanied them in the work. Ooh, okay. So a little bit of background here. Back in Acts, I think 13. They're going around, they're doing their missionary journey. John called Mark is with them. And then actually while they're doing some work with the Gentile believers and actually baptize and have some great success with Gentile believers, Mark all of a sudden pieces out. He's like, I'm out, I'm done, I'm good, and goes back to Jerusalem and kind of leaves them hanging in the middle of their trip, in the middle of the work, in the middle of everything they're doing. Mark leaves. Now, there are some scholars that think that Mark actually had an issue with the way that Paul was bringing in Gentile believers and actually went back to Jerusalem and snitched on it. Actually went back and told them, hey, Paul's doing some stuff out here with the Gentiles, and I think y'all should know about it. So then that leads to Paul having to have kind of this confrontation with the church in Acts chapter 15. So especially if that's the case, one could understand why Paul might be a little salty. You could understand then why Paul might be a little upset with Mark, being like, whoa, not only did you leave me, like, could you imagine like going on a mission trip, like a share him or something, and then like halfway through someone's like, you know what, this isn't my scene, I'm gonna bounce. Okay, so who's going to preach the other 6 sermons? We only have enough people to cover each one of these sites. What are we going to do? Like, that's not okay. So I don't blame Paul coming here. And when Barnabas, his mentor, by the way, so someone that Paul has a really close relationship with, Barnabas is like, hey, you know what we should do? We should bring Mark with us on this next trip. Paul's like, no. Maybe he's doing the thing like in the nominating committee where he's like, yeah, I've got some reservations and some concerns. Can we have a little sidebar and talk about this for a minute? You put this name forward and I'm not sure about it. I have concerns. But then it says, the disagreement became so sharp that they parted company. So basically the band split up. Basically, Barnabas and Paul have irreconcilable differences, and they decide to separate. Whether it's amicable or not is questionable. Barnabas takes Mark, and then Paul chooses Silas and sets out the brothers and sisters, commending him to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. And that's kind of where they leave it. That's kind of where they drop it. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I really like the tea. Sometimes I really like the drama. And so sometimes I'm like, ooh, what's going on here? Like, come on, tell me more about what's happening with Barnabas and Paul here, because this is juicy, this is spicy. Like, this is entertaining. Like, what's going on here? But we don't really hear anything until we get to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11. Now, what's interesting about 2 Timothy is that traditionally speaking, first off, we assume that Paul is in prison at this point, because I'm talking about being a prisoner in chains in chapter 1, and then later on in chapter 4, like some of the instructions he gives are really specific, like bring me a cloak, try to come before winter, make sure you bring some of my supplies, because obviously he's not free to go get the things he needs himself. So traditionally speaking, we think that Paul's in prison, but not just that. We think that the stuff in 2 Timothy is some of the last things he writes before he is executed by Rome. So this might very well kind of be essentially Paul's last words. And so 2 Timothy chapter 4 is kind of interesting because there's a lot of real practical stuff in his closing of the letter. But here in verse 11, we have what I think is the most important part. He's like, only Luke is with me. So he's kind of like, he's used to working with a team, and it's a team of 2 right now, and that's not bad, but that's not great. And he goes, get Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me in ministry. Maybe over time, maybe over reflection, Paul realized, you know what, maybe I was a little harsh on Mark. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I didn't thoroughly explain to him what I was doing, and that's led him to follow his conscience and do what he did. Maybe after time and reflection, Paul realized, you know what, maybe Mark wasn't as bad as I thought he was. And so thankfully, before Paul dies, he has the opportunity to reconcile with Mark and to bring Mark back and to bring him into ministry with him, even if it's for a short time, because we think about a year or so after this is written, we think that Paul is executed. What I want to briefly say this morning is, as we're talking about this month, as we're talking about that keychain leadership, and basically the idea of giving the keys away. And we're not fans of this idea. And in fact, colloquially in our cultures, giving up the keys is usually seen as a very negative thing and a very tough conversation you have to have with aging, ailing parents. Sorry, Mom, you can't really drive anymore. You're going to have to give me the keys. Thankfully, my grandma was backing out of her driveway, accidentally bumped a trash can, and decided she was done, and handed over the keys peacefully, and all was well. But when we think about handing over the keys, oftentimes I think we think of it as, oh, well, I'm getting replaced. Oh, I'm no longer useful. I no longer have a purpose or a function, and now someone else is going to take over what I have. Maybe, and I'm just wondering, maybe Paul saw Mark, and maybe Paul saw Mark's potential. Maybe Paul was a little afraid. Maybe Paul wondered, is this who's going to replace me someday? And maybe that led Paul to be a little harder on Mark than he should have been. Definitely was pretty hard on Mark after the fact. This morning I want to remind us that our young adults and our young people, as we hand them the keys, they're going to be flaky. I'm just going to be honest with you. College kids are kind of flaky. They really are. And you know how I know this for sure? Because I was a flaky college kid too. When I started ministry, and my good friend Manny, and I'm really sorry for this, Manny, he'd invite me to come preach, and then like the night before or whatever, I'd get really nervous and scared about it and like not sure about it, and then I'd just flake and I'd give him an excuse of why I couldn't make it. And he knew they were excuses. He knew what was going on. And he was disappointed for sure, but then he's like, well, I'll figure it out. You know, I was flaky too. I was inconsistent too. I was unreliable too. And you know, and I have a pretty good bet that most of you at that age probably were too. And I want to say that that's, in a way, that's okay, right? Is that because it's just part of what comes with that time in life. And maybe Mark, in that time of life when he was on that trip, there could be a number of reasons why he bounced. It doesn't tell us why he bounced. He could have just woke up one morning and been like, oh, you know what? I got some school stuff to do. I'm out. Or, you know what? My girl back home is missing me, sent me a letter. I'm out. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. Is because this giving of the keys idea, this keychain leadership idea, is not clean and not perfect and not completely organized. It's not. It's messy, it's experimental, it's a learning process for everyone involved. It's learning for those who take the keys, and it's also learning for those who are giving the keys. So this morning, I want you, as we're kind of gear up for next week's, where I bring everything together. This morning, I want you to think about back when you were that age, and maybe remember a time when somebody counted on you for something and you didn't deliver. And how did they respond to you? Because I'll tell you right now, with our young people, they might not remember every positive thing, but they'll remember the negative. They'll remember the times when they're not trusted. They'll remember the times that they're told no. They'll remember those things. And so the question I want to ask us this morning is, are we going to be a community that says no, or we don't trust you, or you're not enough yet, or wait until you're older? Or are we going to be a community that says yes? That is, Jesus said, because remember, the keys aren't even ours to begin with. Jesus gave us the keys. And then what we're supposed to do with the keys is just pass them on, because this is what we've been doing for 2,000 years, is perpetually passing the keys on until Jesus comes back again. So this morning, may we be a community that says yes. May we be a community that are eager to get the keys out and pass the keys on. Pray with me. Father in heaven, Lord, thank you for trusting us, and thank you for giving us the ability to trust. And Lord, even when people are unreliable, even when people are flaky, even when our young people say they're going to be there but they're not, Lord, help us to have the patience and the stamina and the perseverance to help them and to help them learn and grow, so that as we're handing them the keys, we're doing what you have asked us to do. In your name I pray, Jesus. Amen. Now, as we bring the Asadors back up, just a reminder that today we are going to have a love offering for them. And so if you've been really appreciating the music as much as I have, please, if you can, feel free to help out this wonderful and amazing ministry. Thank you.